So, energy modeling is important to reduce energy and cost and to help people make more informed decisions for housing when planning projects. The HERS index, of course, is the most popular, most well-known, time-tested method to do this for our residential market. It is also tied directly to the Energy Star program, which seems to be going to be continuing on, and as well as LEED certification. But what's interesting now is there is a method to determine easily the operational carbon and compare carbon usage across housing stocks and portfolios. So please join us today to learn more about this and how you can make more informed decisions in your projects to reduce your operational carbon. Now, before we get started, I just want to say a big thanks to our platinum sponsor, Rheem. Rheem, of course, has technology through the water heating to immediately reduce operational carbon by updating your projects that you're working on or switching your existing housing stock over to heat pump water heating technology. You're going to immediately see carbon savings. You'll definitely be able to model that out in these types of programs to see that. And definitely, in most cases, cost savings as well. I've been using their 240 volt for 8 years now. It works great. And then also for an easy and fast gas replacement and more affordable potentially, they have their 120 volt, just plug and play right into the outlet without having to update the electrical systems. So check them out over at greenhomeinstitute.org/REAMHPWH. All right, welcome to Modeling Operational Carbon Emissions with the HERS Carbon Index. This course is brought to you by the Green Home Institute. The Green Home Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. Today, I will be your moderator. My name is Brett Little, and I am the education manager here at the organization. This course is approved for multiple continuing education units, including the two pillars under place and energy within our Certified Green Home Professional designation. AIA Health, Welfare, and Safety may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. And as always, Passive House in the US does require and involve HERS rating, at least on their new construction. So this is also approved for CEUS. So check out that 5-digit code sent to you at the end if you're here. Now, before we get started, just a reminder that the HERS index rating as an energy usage modeling tool has always been foundational for residential green building projects to determine compliance with the energy pathways. In LEED specifically, this is noted under Energy and Atmosphere, or EA prerequisite, minimum energy performance. This essentially requires that projects meet Energy Star for homes, which requires, in turn, a project typically has around a HERS index rating of 70 to achieve the Energy Star standard. We also just recently released an update to our Green Star Homes program where we have set the certified baseline to the HERS 70 level as well. And then for LEED renovations under minimum energy performance, you only need to score an 85 in the HERS index to achieve certification. So they give you a little more leeway to help transform our existing housing stock. Now, also in LEED, like many other green building programs, the lower you can drive that HERS rating down, the more energy efficient the home is, the more energy points you can earn. Remember, lower is better down to 0, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is going to help driving that number down with those more LEED points, be able to help achieve a higher level of LEED, plus all the other benefits you get from doing that. And so again, this is done within the LEED annual, the energy and atmosphere under the annual energy use section for the credits. The program is used both for single family and multifamily. Typically, it's capped at 3 stories for using the HERS index within LEED, but under Energy Star multifamily new construction protocols, you can go up to 5 stories using this protocol as well. But for today, we're here to discuss not necessarily energy usage, but the operational carbon usage that's associated with and derived from the HERS rating. You can see right here in the intent listed under LEED, the intent of this credit, both their minimum annual minimum performance and the annual energy one, the intent right here, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so that way, using these tools, you can help make more informed decisions to meet those intentions under LEED. And the other thing you should know is that while LEED version 5 has not launched yet for residential, we do know that under version 5, there's a much more bigger focus on being able to verify operational carbon usage reduction. So it's going to be very important. And so all three need to be tackled within homes: energy, cost, and carbon. We need to look at them all, and that's what we're here to talk about, and that's what, this tool can do. And so that's why I'm very excited to welcome back Ryan Meares. I think, Ryan, you've been on the show now 3 or 4 times, always coming back to give us an update. So it's always great to have you back on, and appreciate your time and RESNET's time for having you. So welcome, and please take it away.
All right, thanks, Brett. I will. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your time and joining today. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be talking about, as Brett mentioned, operational carbon emissions with RESNET's HERS carbon index. Let me get this into presenter mode. All right. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Ryan Meares. I've been with RESNET for a little over 8 years now. I'm the program director, so I oversee many different programs that ResNet has, including the HERS Carbon Index and HERS H2O, which is a whole house water efficiency rating, and the HERS Index, and new program we have coming on embodied carbon that hopefully some of you have heard about. I wanted to give just a quick update on HERS ratings with some preliminary data for 2025. So it's also important to note that all HERS ratings do require a carbon index rating as well. So if a home is getting a HERS rating, it will also have a HERS carbon index rating that accompanies it on the rating certificate. I'll show you a little bit later what that looks like as well. In 2025, we had over 420,000 HERS ratings. The average HERS score for all those was a 53. We also had a little over 7,500 HERS H2O ratings. That's our whole house water efficiency standard. It's definitely picking up steam in the West and the Southwest, where water is obviously more top of mind and important in the design, and also the state and local regulations in those West and Southwest states that require more water efficient homes, especially on the outdoors as far as landscaping. Of the 420,000 homes, 317,000 were single family, so just over 100,000 being multifamily. And we did record HERS ratings in all 50 states as well as Washington, D.C. In terms of the top states for ratings in 2025, you can see here, as is typical, Texas comes out on top, followed by Arizona, North Carolina, and Florida. And um, uh, and these are all states, as you probably will notice, that there's a lot of new construction. Most HERS ratings are done on new construction, so that's typically where we see large numbers of ratings coming from those states and metro areas that have a lot of new home building happening.
Hey, Ryan, do you know any sense of how this data shakes out per capita?
I have not done that. I have not done that.
Hmm.
I have not looked at that just yet.
Yeah,
We do have a data analyst now, though, that would
yeah.
be able to run those numbers for us. We do we do a comparison each year of the number of HERS ratings compared to the number of residential permits
Or yeah,
that were
something like
pulled in
that.
each
Yeah,
state.
yeah.
That gives a percentage
Hmm.
of the number of HERS ratings done compared to the number of permits that were pulled for single family homes.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I think in Texas last year, it was about 67% of new homes were getting a HERS rating.
Okay, so that would still even put them on top, even though they have a high population. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, on a percentage basis, compared to HERS rating, compared to permits, Massachusetts actually comes out on top.
Oh, really?
Typically
Okay.
over 90%. One year was at 98% of all homes, all new homes there getting a HERS rating. So yeah, Massachusetts is usually number one as far as percentage of ratings compared to new permits.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So when we're talking about carbon emissions, there's obviously embodied carbon is a huge chunk of the carbon emissions that go into home building. For our purposes here, we're going to be largely focused on operational carbon, but I will also touch on embodied carbon at the end of the presentation and how it can be linked to operational carbon as far as a carbon intensity. So I will touch on that just briefly at the end of the presentation. In terms of decarbonizing operational emissions, it's really about reducing energy use. So to the extent that you can decrease energy use, you can also reduce your emissions. Adding renewable energy is certainly another way to do that. That could be to the house or renewable energy added to the grid. And you'll see when I start talking about how the calculations are done and the data that goes in behind them, you'll see how adding renewable energy to the grid can also assist with lowering the overall operational carbon emissions. And also changing the time at which electricity gets consumed so that it's being used more when there's renewables like solar and wind power that are generating. That's an important one, and you'll see when I talk about the calculations how the hourly simulation it really impacts that, and that's why changing the time at when electricity is consumed can also help to reduce those carbon emissions and ultimately the carbon index score. Switching fuels can do that as well. So switching from a higher emissions to a lower emission fuel, so gas or oil or propane to electric, assuming that it's a fairly clean grid, and I have a little bit of data on that. Won't get into it too deep, but obviously switching from a higher emission fuel to a lower emission fuel will help reduce your carbon emissions as well. Builders are also talking about carbon, and this is really you'll see from the one of this date here on the DR Horton ESG report from 2022. That's really when we started seeing between 2021 and 22, we really started seeing a focus on carbon, especially among the publicly traded builders. And there was a couple of things that were driving that. I think probably the most significant was investors and those that are investors were starting to ask, what builders are doing to address carbon emissions and energy and even water as well. So kind of overall for sustainability, investors were starting to ask builders what they're doing. And in some cases, not choosing not to invest in a builder because maybe they don't have the best sustainability practices. So we started seeing this carbon start being included in more builder sustainability reporting, really around 2021 and 2022, and it's continued since then. Back in 22, it was also somewhat driven by the Biden administration and their focus on carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. That obviously with the new administration that has changed now, but nonetheless, that on the private sector side, with investors demanding this type of information, you can bet that publicly traded builders, at least, will continue to monitor that, despite the current administration and regulatory framework around carbon and greenhouse gas. Standard 301. So this is ANSI RESNET ICC 301. It is the standard that defines how to calculate an energy rating index. And it also contains the calculations for CO2 emissions. So the first version of this standard was published in 2014. And there's always been a section called pollution emission savings. And so since back in when the first version of this standard was published, there has been calculations in there to determine the carbon usage to estimate carbon operational carbon emissions within the calculations. And I'll talk about a little bit about the old way that was done. So the original back in 2014 standard was based on EPA's eGrid subregions. And the eGrid data is historical, so it's backward looking data on electric generation emissions for CO2 and SOx and NOx as well. Not to sound like a Dr. Seuss book, but annual energy consumption by fuel type was basically applied to those eGrid emissions. And that's really where the CO2 emissions came from. But there was no index at that time in the old standard. It was purely reporting the estimated tons of operational carbon uh, in terms of a calculation and not converted into an index. So the HERS Carbon Index was first adopted as an addendum to Standard 301 in 2019 version. It continues on now with the 2022 and actually the 2025 version of Standard 301 to estimate operational carbon emissions. But then what the addendum did was it revised the calculation methodology, and I'll explain what I mean by that, and it added in the index score calculation to it. So we do have the tons of carbon still as a metric, but the index score was added in as a new metric within that original addendum to the 2019 version of the standard. And it's also important that it values carbon emissions based on time of energy use. So as I said earlier, if you can change when you're using electricity, you can also impact your carbon emissions. And that's important because about 6 or 7 years ago, RESNET implemented a requirement that all RESNET accredited software um, be able to do calculations based on hourly energy consumption as opposed to seasonal energy consumption. So, and all the calculations for the carbon index are done in ResNet accredited software. In terms of how the CO2 index works, there's really three important components to it. So first of all, the new CO2 calculations use NREL's Cambium database. If you've ever looked up the NREL Cambium database, if you've ever played around in there, you'll see that there's a lot of different scenarios that can be used in terms of generating estimated carbon emissions. And for this one, so it's within the NREL Cambium database, it's going to be it's hourly CO2 emission rates. And then it's forward looking. So we're using forward looking projections for 2025 through 2050. And then that gets combined with the hourly energy use estimates that come from the ResNet accredited software. And then there's also some emission factors for combustion fuels. So there's emissions factors for natural gas, fuel oil, and propane.
So Ryan,
Yeah.
let me ask you this: if it's going out to 2050, and I'm just thinking like then sometimes a home, of course, makes an improvement or whatever, and then they could submit that improvement and update their HERS rating based on a structural improvement, of course.
Mhm.
But let's say you do a prod, the CO2 rating today, and then in 2035, whatever, you have a much more cleaner grid. Is there and would there be like, hey, it's a cleaner grid now, reprocess it so we get a lower carbon score, or is that already sort of factored in ahead of time, like you said, through 2050?
It is. The answer is that, those numbers could change over time.
Yeah.
It's the forward-looking projections for 2025 to 2050.
Yeah.
But if you redid that rating in 2035, that may have first been done in 2025, you could still see changes in that because that Cambium data will change over time.
Right.
And they do update that database to account for additional renewable energy that gets added to the grid and things like that. So the projections are using so they use long run marginal emission rates.
Mhm.
And so
Okay.
marginal is
Yeah, you're
really
talking about it
just,
here. Yeah.
yeah. So this is kind of this kind of explains the three different scenarios,
Yeah.
or three different options that are used in Cambium. You can select a variety of different options, but we use the long run marginal emission rates. They also have a short run marginal emission rate, which really just considers that the way that the grid is now is going
Mhm.
to stay that way. The way the
Right.
grid currently exists will stay that way. That would be a short run marginal emission rate. In our case, we're using a long run, which means that there's going to be a marginal increase in electric loads,
Right.
which may be more than marginal, as we're seeing, I think, with what's happening with data centers.
Sure. Sure.
So, marginal maybe even higher. But it also considers the structure of the grid as changing over time,
Sure.
as opposed to staying the way that it is now.
Thank you.
Yep. So the other thing is, the other scenario is the low renewable energy cost. So this assumes that the cost of renewable energy is going to decrease over time. So going from 2025 through 2050, assuming that the cost of renewable energy is going to continue to go down. I think that that's been the trend, and I assume it will continue. But that was the scenario that was chosen. There are other renewable energy cost scenarios in the Cambium database, but for the CO2 index, we use the low renewable energy cost scenario. And then we also use combustion and pre-combustion. Combustion, I think, is obvious, but pre-combustion is referring to, is accounting for the fuel extraction and the processing and transport as well. So the Cambium database also, in addition to those three key options that are selected as part of the data set, for Cambium, the data in the Cambium database is broken down into 134 regions. It's and you can see them, what they refer to as balancing areas, within the data set. But so it gets much more granular than you get with the EPA eGrid regions, because there's far fewer of those, compared to the 134 balancing areas that Cambium uses. Also wanted to pull this in. This is, the looking at the U.S. States, and also Puerto Rico, in terms of the the 7 states plus Puerto Rico that have the dirtiest electricity sources. This graph is from 2019 till midway through 2024, and you can see, Delaware, Louisiana, West Virginia, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and Mississippi as having the dirtiest electricity sources. And that's important for our purposes here because, a dirtier grid is going to mean higher emissions for electricity usage. This chart is actually the median CO2 emissions for rated homes for all of 2025, and it's expressed in tons. And you can see, so this is actually the top 20 states that had the highest median CO2 emissions last year. And you can overlap that with the states on the previous slide, and you'll see that 5 out of the 7 states that were there, are among the top 20 highest for median CO2 emissions for last year. One other thing to note here, you'll also see that the majority of these 20 states are in a heating dominant climate. So the Wisconsin and Alaska, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Minnesota. Um, so these states are also more likely to use gas for heating, which is also going to impact the carbon emissions. And I'll show an example of how that impact happens. But obviously, when the if the rated if the reference home is an all electric home, as it is for the carbon index, then using gas is going to significantly increase your carbon index score. When we look at electric versus gas, you'll see here. So if the this is just filtering out homes that have heating and hot water that are both have an electric fuel source. 2.9 tons is the average CO2 emissions of the rated home. That's per home per year. And then when we switch that to gas, to natural gas fuel source for heating and hot water, we get up to 5.6 tons average CO2 emissions. So you can see there, the selection, the fuel choice has an impact on the overall CO2 emissions.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Ryan, because one of the questions was about fugitive methane gas leaks. And so I'm curious, I guess the question was kind of like, does that factor into this as well, in regards to what I imagine they're talking about these leaks that are occurring in the system, both outside of the house and, quite frankly, we test newer homes all the time. Like our Green Star program requires gas leak tests and find leaks within the house. So
Yeah.
do you know if within your mathematical formulas here, this sort of overage that's occurring from gas is also a result of these leaks, or is this it just being burned at the source?
Yeah, this is only burned at the source. So the important thing about HERS ratings and therefore the HERS carbon index is that it's an asset rating. So
Right.
it is strictly within the within the confines of the home.
Yeah.
And what is in place at the time that the rating is completed. So
Right.
things that are happening outside the home as far as the HERS index goes, those are not accounted for.
Could you foresee, I guess, a box a raider might click that says, no known leaks in the house, right in the house, the asset, the house.
Mhm.
And if they're not sure, you almost would factor in a higher rate. I mean, would you foresee that as part of a component of this?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's many times when a rater goes to do a rating there, the gas may not even be turned on yet,
Right.
because it's
Right.
new construction. So
Right.
they may not see that. I don't foresee that as something happening. It's interesting though, because we do talk about leaks a lot on the water side
Yes.
where they're
Well,
much
same.
more visible.
Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So we do it, and the other thing that's really different about water is we do go outside the home and look at the entire lot in terms of outdoor water use, but that doesn't happen in
Yeah.
for on the energy side with HERS and carbon.
Yeah.
So I don't foresee that, but it's we leaks on the water side are something that we ask raters to look at for the HERS H2O
Right.
standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very important. So thank
Yep. Yep. So here, when the HERS carbon index was first being developed, the Florida Solar Energy Center did some modeling, and this is one of the charts that came from that. And you'll see it's looking at long run marginal emission rates over the course of a year. And you can see, pay particular attention to Sacramento and Duluth. You see way down here at the bottom, kind of lowest emission rates. And then this dotted line across the center is the natural gas rate that is used. And then you see some of these other ones with significantly higher um, emission rates. When we look at those in terms of the impact of the fuel type on the CO2 index. You can see so this is looking at four different scenarios, gas and electric, and then a high efficiency scenario. So this is basically a home that when this modeling was done, a home that was built to the 2018 version of the IECC. Plus, it had high efficient equipment and it had high efficient lighting and appliances. And then taking that scenario and adding 4 kilowatts of PV to the gas and 4 kilowatts of PV to the electric scenario. And you see what happens um, over here. And you saw on the previous slide for Duluth and Sacramento, uh, they had they had very low overall emissions. But when you add in gas, the blue line here and then the gray one, you can see what happens to the carbon index on those way up over 100 and over 150 even for those homes. So that's the impact that gas has, especially in a place that has a very clean electric grid. Like Duluth and Sacramento. So that is the impact of gas, and you can see for electricity the orange and yellow columns. You'll see that they're fairly steady throughout. Not significant changes until you get to Duluth and Sacramento with the two gas scenarios, and you see significantly higher index scores there. So one of the questions we explored and we got frequently when we were first testing the carbon index is, can a home achieve net zero energy use but not net zero operational carbon? So we looked at a hypothetical example. We modeled a home in Atlanta, Georgia. It had a HERS index score of 0, then um, a carbon index score of 23. So yes, it's definitely possible to not have to not be able to achieve a 0 carbon index score, but still have a net zero energy score. And let's see why that is. So this is a chart of the of this hypothetical home in Atlanta. It's a net zero energy home. You'll see three lines here. Yellow is PV production, green is net energy use, and then purple is the emission rate over the course of a year. And you can see one of the first things that you'll look at is that when the emission rate is the highest, the PV is not producing. Then when the emission rate is the lowest, here PV is the highest. So that's where the hourly simulation comes into play, and realizing that when your PV is producing, it's also the time when the emission rate, presuming that the grid also has a fairly significant amount of renewable energy, probably solar, and therefore the emission rates when the PV the 4 kilowatt PV on the home is producing, the emission rates on the grid are also the lowest. In terms of how it works, this is one slide because it's really easy for the carbon index. It's done in RESNET accredited HERS software. You take the information that's entered in for a HERS rating is used, the calculations for the carbon index score and estimating the carbon usage is all done in the background in software. So the HERS rater is essentially entering in the same information that they would for a HERS rating, and it's the software then calculates the carbon index score and estimated carbon usage. And there's no additional inspections that are required for this. For operational carbon, for embodied carbon is a little bit different. I'm not going to get into the inspection requirements, but there will be certainly more inspections that would be required on the embodied carbon side. As I mentioned earlier, the carbon index is required for all all HERS ratings, has to be included on the rating certificate. The rating certificate is generated by software, but ResNet also several years ago created this rated home label. The rated home label is a summary of all the ratings and certifications on the home. And so we generate this label for every HERS rating that's in the ResNet registry. Although I've fictionalized the project information. This is an actual home here that did score -7 on the HERS index. So producing a little bit more energy than it uses on an annual basis, and a carbon index score of 18. You can see down here the estimated annual carbon savings would be 9 tons per year for that home.
So, Ryan, you say this is automatically produced. So
Yep.
now I know you all don't get into dictating fees of what the raters charge. It's all market and
Mhm.
all that. But assuming somebody said, "Hey, I want my, my ResNet carbon score," and a rater goes, "Oh, okay, we're going to upcharge for that service, right?" Would it be fair to say that that is something that is just generated in general? It doesn't really require any extra work on their end?
Yeah, the carbon index
Yeah.
it is all generated in software. The data entry, there's no additional data entry than would be required for the HERS
Mm.
rating.
Yeah.
So the carbon index itself, there's no additional inspection required, and no additional data entry as far as inputs.
Yeah.
This rated home label, the important thing maybe I should clarify that the
Yeah.
the ResNet registry does not do the calculations to determine the HERS score or the carbon index. That's all done in software, but it's
Right.
submitted to the data itself is submitted to the registry. Um,
Right.
and the rated home label can be downloaded through hersindex.com.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have a public search page there. You can enter a home address, and if the home has a HERS rating, then you can
Mm.
download the rated home label.
Yeah. Well, real quick, going back, and you tell me if you're going to get into to storage, right, and batteries, and we can put a pin on it if you are. But I wanted to kind of go back to what you were showing, where there was the mismatch of solar, right, from when the grid actually needed it.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, okay, if a project has storage, in the form of a battery, then two things. One is, could that resolve that issue? But second, I'd imagine that then is something extra that the rater is looking for if that does resolve that issue. So could you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, good question. And I'm not going to get into that, so I'll address it
Okay.
now. The battery storage is not currently included in the standard.
Okay.
My understanding is there is currently, or there was an amendment proposal to the standard to add in battery storage.
Mm,
So the
mm,
calculations don't yet exist for looking at the impact that battery storage could have on the HERS
mm.
index or on the carbon index. But it is I'll say it's being worked on by the Standard Development Committee, or I certainly expect that it will be something on their agenda
Yeah.
eventually. But I don't think it hasn't been resolved yet as far as how to do those calculations when battery storage is part of the home.
Yeah, fair
Yeah,
enough. And then I was just curious because you had noted the different, and even this one you're showing here, there's the mismatch between 18 carbon index, negative
yeah.
7 on the rating. Have you ever seen where it could actually flip the other way around, or is it typically just where typically the carbon index will just often be a higher number than the HERS index?
Yeah, I have not seen any of them anything flipped yet.
Yeah,
I think it will remain where the carbon index is typically going to be higher than your HERS index score.
sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sure. So the other thing that comes up once we, made this change to start incorporating a carbon index into standard 301, it also, spurred opportunities for how can the carbon index be used. And we've seen places, some municipalities start looking at, could it be something that they incentivize or something that's required? Utilities have also been looking at it in terms of incentive programs, looking at in incentive, particularly in places where carbon is more important of a metric, and can utility programs start to incentivize based on a carbon index rather than a HERS index or ERI score? Also, just generally for consumer awareness, now that there's an index score attached to it that operates in the same way that the HERS index functions, it can also be used for that. Sustainability reporting, as I showed earlier, builders are starting to pick up on reporting carbon emissions. So you can see that it will continue to be used by builders likely for that sustainability reporting. Green bond programs, we've seen these on the energy side, and certainly expect that some may pop up on the carbon side as well. And then informing new technologies, this really comes down to that time of use calculation, and how grid interactive appliances or equipment could be accounted for in the standard, and how those types of technologies, how we can model those to show the impact that they have on carbon emissions. And then the other area is really about the energy code. So can the CO2 index score be used as a target score within the energy code, or at the state level as well, when not necessarily the model code, but at the state or local level, um, to set a target, much like the energy rating index target scores that have been in the IECC since the 2015 version. And then there's also some opportunities in terms of the underlying calculations, being able to accommodate specific programs or incentives within software. This has come up in particular because states that where it's the heating sources very commonly going to be natural gas. Those CO2 scores are going to be very high, and since the standard right now requires that the reference home be an all electric home, it's certainly when natural gas is being used as heating or for hot water heating, it really hurts the score. And so utilities have kind of approached us saying, what would happen if we changed that reference home to be a gas? What kind of adjustments would there be to the baseline if that was to happen? So there's some opportunities in terms of customizing the carbon index program to meet specific needs. There's also a proposal to the 2027 IECC that's being developed right now to allow the CO2 index to be an optional path in the ERI path, and I believe it's specifically as part of the appendix, the net zero appendix option, where it could be an ERI or a CO2 index. There's also been a proposal to just require that the CO2 index be included on the certificate with the ERI score. That wasn't setting a target, but it was more of an educational piece to start including that as a required field on the rating certificate. So there's certainly been proposals that have popped up within the energy code world that are looking at, where does carbon play, and could we use a CO2 index target score in place of or in addition to an ERI target score for energy. I pulled a little bit of data from 2025. The average carbon index score for 2025 was a 64, whereas the average HERS score, as I showed earlier, was a 53. and 3.4 tons is the average CO2 savings, and that's per home per year for carbon in 2025. And before I wrap up, I just wanted to touch on embodied carbon. So the RESNET is working on Standard 1550. It's a joint RESNET ICC standard. The preliminary, it's in the preliminary draft standard phase. We have completed 2 rounds of public comments. Chris Magwood is the chair of that standard development committee, and I just wanted to point out that the purpose of the embodied carbon is a little different. It's not producing an index score, at least not yet. So for the initial version of the standard, it's really about quantifying, verifying, and reporting embodied carbon emissions. And it's also important that the standard, it does not set a benchmark. It doesn't establish levels of building performance. It's just simply about producing a methodology that allows us to quantify and verify and report on embodied carbon, which is different in that it doesn't pull in index option. And one of the reasons is that it would be quite difficult, I think, to try to determine what the reference home would be for embodied carbon. For example, on the energy side, it's the 2006 version of the IECC that serves as the reference home for HERS rating. So what would we compare that to on the embodied carbon side? What would be that reference home, and how would we establish that in order to create an index for embodied carbon? And then,
Um,
yep, go ahead, Brett.
well, and oh, it looks like you're going to talk about it, so go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So this is actually, this is my last slide. So combining operational embodied carbon. So if you add your operational carbon emissions plus your embodied carbon emissions, you can get this carbon intensity. And this graph is actually from a study that was just recently released, the Massachusetts 100 home embodied carbon study. And this is kind of the one, this is the one chart in there that, and there's a short section that kind of discusses what this carbon intensity means. And part of it is about flexibility in terms of choosing materials that may be higher in embodied carbon, but they may also save more energy in terms of operational carbon. Uh, and it's also, so the graph here is looking at the darker green on the bottom is your upfront embodied carbon emissions, and then the lighter one is your operational emissions in tons per year over a 25-year period. So you can see that although the upfront embodied carbon emissions are significantly more than 1 year of operational emissions, when you add that up over the expected life of the home or of the efficiency measures, then you start to see that the operational carbons compound significantly over time and end up being more than the initial upfront embodied emissions. So this is a great study, the Massachusetts 100 home embodied carbon study. If you're interested in looking more at embodied carbon.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought that up because we are talking with them to bring them on and have a
Yep.
session on that study and the integration of it into the HERS index. And I guess I'm curious, would you foresee that the sort of carbon score shift when embodied is a component, hopefully, of the HERS index to being all encompassing of both embodied and operational, or would they still probably stay a standalone for a while?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I do see that. I do think the next phase of development will be this carbon intensity
Mm.
metric, which really pulls
Mm.
together the operational
Mm.
embodied carbon. I think that the
Mm.
standards will remain separate, but I do think that there will be a way to pull them together in a carbon intensity. And I think that I think builders would support that because it does give them it gives them more options, right? As opposed to just looking at embodied carbon and saying, how do I lower this? It's looking at it a little more holistically and saying, what impact does this material choice have on operational carbon down the road versus
Yeah.
just the upfront carbon initially.
Yeah, I think that's really important if you have one tool and you can look at that embodied versus the operational versus
Yep.
the purely energy versus the cost, right? You're looking at all those
Yep.
and you're saying, where's that sweet spot? So that's really exciting to hear that that's kind of on the horizon. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And that's it for me. So happy to take any more questions that come in. And I'll also make a note that the 100 home embodied carbon study will be a session at the ResNet conference. And I did forget to include the a conference plug, but the ResNet conference will be in March in San Antonio. So if you're interested, there will be sessions on energy, water, carbon, and all things HERS ratings.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that reminder, Ryan. We'll send out a link after
Great.
this to everyone to check out the conference. So, I wanted to quick throw something up here on so just a reminder to everybody that there is something called from LEED standpoint the LEED for homes energy budget. This was developed quite a long time ago and it's integrated into most of the softwares that produce the HERS index, right? And so it's just another report that is generated outside of that. And so the reason I'm bringing it up is because what we have found in practice over the years is, well, first of all, two things. One is any homes that have like a bunch of high energy use things like pools or heated driveways or heated roofs or whatever, they have to use this and incorporate that. So typically it is required to use this. So you're still getting a HERS rating, but you have to use this for your energy usage and incorporate those things. But the point I want to get to for everybody is that under the annual energy use or minimum energy performance for LEED, what we have found is a lot of homes and multifamily buildings, especially up in our cold climates, that are going all electric. If you just compare apples to apples, everything is the same, and you switch from a gas furnace and water heater over to a heat pumps, your HERS index rating goes higher or gets worse, just everything else staying equal. And so this, for LEED's purposes anyway, has been one solution to that, which is to, use this instead of the HERS rating to get, again, you still have to do a HERS rating, you're still getting certified, you're still getting the label, but you have to use this instead for your minimum performance or your points because you're going to score out a lot better for electrification. So that's my comment. My question, I guess, Ryan, is then because it goes back to an earlier question I asked where you would ever see it flipped, right? You would have your carbon
Mhm.
lower, your HERS higher. And so I guess maybe the question is, could that happen in an instance where you do have a gas home and maybe that would flip it, or is it because you have your carbon index comparing to electric homes, then that couldn't happen. I guess any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for gas homes, your carbon index is always going to be
Hmm.
significantly higher because the reference home is all electric.
Okay.
So that will always be the case for gas. You are right that in generally we do see on the HERS index for gas homes will actually
Mm.
score with everything else being equal, a gas furnace versus electric, or versus a heat pump, I should say. You're going to see usually a couple of points lower on the
Mm.
gas side compared to the heat pump. Not always the case, but we do see generally on average it's going to be a couple of points better for gas than electric on the HERS.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. We got some questions come in. We got a little more time for questions. Before we get to those, just a quick reminder that yes, this session is being recorded. You can head over to Green Home Institute's YouTube channel now, click subscribe, and get an instant update when it's available, or check back there in a week and it will be there. For those of you watching this on demand, but not right now, but in the future sometime, you can take your quiz with an 80% passing rate to get your continuing ed. For those of you here live today, if you've been here for the entire CEU hour, take that survey that pops up, give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. But then also look for your certificate from certs@gutenbergcerts.com. You'll receive your CEUs as long as you've been here for that entire CEU hour. And as always, a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, our executive director, Jose Reyna, our nearly 500 members who support us. We're so close. Help us hit 500 this year if you can. And our sponsors who are helping put out products that are decarbonizing our operational energy, such as Panasonic and Rheem, Timber HP, Architectural Resource, always designing homes that reduce embodied carbon. Check them out, or operational, or both, as well. So, the other question that kind of came in, going back to what you had mentioned about the batteries, I guess they were trying to follow up on if there's anything you all do for our off-grid friends. Clearly, if you can't include batteries, I suppose then there's no benefit for them on that. But otherwise, what else does hers have to consider, and how does that play into carbon index if somebody's not even on the grid?
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. So hers is really um generally agnostic as far as the fuel source. So if you are off grid and you're heating with a wood stove, or you've got a high efficient envelope with a solar that runs a mini split, um, you're gonna score well. So it really doesn't, being on grid or off grid really doesn't matter. You can still rate the home, because it really doesn't matter what the
Hmm.
fuel source is.
Okay. Um, and then the other question that came in here, and I think this kind of question goes back to just in general how um, occupant behavior factors into the HERS index. And I know from like my perspective, we have found in general working with a really good HERS rater who's, on point, we're finding it to be fairly accurate to the actual utility usage. So we've been proud of that. But what can you say to like how behavior is factored into these ratings, and does that play any different role in carbon?
Yeah, so because it's an asset rating,
Mhm.
the only way that um, occupancy is, and therefore occupant behavior
Mhm.
is just
Mhm.
the number of bedrooms is used as a surrogate to estimate the number of
Right,
occupants of the home. But
right.
other than that, the index score, a HERS rating is based on the asset itself, and what's fixed part of the home, and therefore behavior doesn't play into that.
Okay. Um, And I guess can you just speak to real quickly, uh, you know, for existing housing, have you seen any operational data on carbon data on that and how that's kind of coming out differently at all?
No, I have not actually. I
Yeah.
think there are some studies looking at operational data on the existing side. But as far as ResNet data, because so much of our data set is new construction, we don't have a lot on the existing side. So not enough to really to account for a sufficient sample
Right.
size in terms of looking at existing.
And then at the beginning, you mentioned for reducing carbon, um, you know, the ability to, of course, reduce the emissions from the grid. Is there, I guess, I was curious, is renewable energy credits something somebody could purchase and include to reduce their operational carbon?
No, no, I don't believe so. So it would have to be it would have to be on-site solar. So you
Okay.
would not. It does have to be on-site solar in order to
Okay.
be included in the HERS index or carbon index. Yeah,
Okay. So
yeah,
the reality is, and the question kind of here is how do you, how do you get to a zero carbon index? And it's really you're kind of just you have this grid. It is what it is, right? You can't control that, right? Unless you're going to go build somewhere else.
yep,
And
yep,
and then
exactly.
you build the most efficient home and then you just stock as much solar as you can. I mean, is that sort of the answer to getting to zero carbon?
It is, but you will still have those times when, at night when your solar is not doing anything for you
Right.
and your heat pump is running.
Right. Yeah.
So there are gonna, and that's kind of the
Mm,
case. That's what we saw in
mm,
that Atlanta
mm,
example, which is, you've got solar that's not producing, and emissions are the
mm,
highest
mm,
because there's also not solar that's feeding the grid overnight either, but you still have to heat your house. So that's kind of that's where that comes into play.
mhm, mhm. Um, And then just another quick question. Shouldn't the dirtiest states really be evaluated in terms of electric grid to which they are connected? For example, West Virginia is part of PGM, which supplies power as far away as Illinois. I don't know how far you get into this sort of grid management, but I don't know if that question makes sense as far as how you're evaluating the grid.
It does, yeah, it does. And that was that the dirtiest states chart was actually a report from Reuters. Um, and but yes, no, you're right. Yeah, they're uh, in general, I think it was looking at the sources
Yeah.
where the states that have electric uh plants that are run on coal, for example, or potentially natural gas, that have basically states that have little renewable energy. But yeah, there could be, obviously with the way that the grid overlaps, there could be parts of that state. Which is why the carbon index is done at the zip code level, and pulling in data from Cambium that's closest to that zip code. So it's not a
Mm,
state level calculation that's done in the carbon index. It's actually based on the zip code level and the closest
yeah.
grid to that location.
Yeah. And then real quick, we mentioned solar for renewable application, but does HERS index allow for things like wind or water inputs?
Um, in terms of renewable energy,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I guess you could. I'm actually not familiar with the inputs. I don't know if every software
Mm,
supports that, or if any
mm,
software supports that. But
yeah.
in theory,
Mm.
it could be done.
Yeah, I know it's rare do we see, especially water, but even wind these days.
Yeah,
I don't think we see small single family home wind anymore because it's there's never the ROI is never there. So,
yeah, that's it.
um,
Yeah.
well, great, Ryan. Well, I really appreciate your time. I
Yep.
know you got to get going, but just real quick, can you remind everyone where they can go to learn more if they want to get more information?
Yeah, resnet.us or hersindex.com. You can find more information about HERS and the carbon index there.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to
Yep.
ResNet. Everyone, go check out the conference. If it's not this year, if you're listening to this later, it'll be next year, right? There's one
Yeah, every year.
every year. So go
Yep.
check it out, learn more, and take care. Be well. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.